The Thraxian world was burning. The skies were streaked with fire as ships from another galaxy launched devastating strikes on the cities below. Thrax's people ran in every direction, the air thick with smoke and the screech of airships overhead. They had never seen a force like this in all their history. The invaders were relentless, cold, and efficient, their ships slicing through the atmosphere with unnatural speed. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted, only that the attack was overwhelming. Every Thraxian soldier was pushed back, every defense was shattered, cities fell without mercy. The once proud civilization of Thrax was crumbling beneath a tide of alien technology that seemed untouchable. The Thraxians did what they always did, they fought. But this time their enemies didn't just retaliate, they adapted. The invaders could see through their stealth technology. Their weapons outclassed their own, and worst of all, their tactics were perfect. Every move was calculated, every attack made with surgical precision. At first, the Thraxian government tried to organize a defense, but it quickly became clear that it was hopeless. Their communications were hacked, their systems were compromised, and their once powerful fleets were rendered useless. The enemy was too much for them. They needed help. Thrax had heard rumors of the Deathworlders before, legends whispered in hushed tones in the darkest corners of space about humans, wild, terrifying beings from a planet where survival was not a matter of choice, but of pure instinct. These creatures were supposed to be a force unlike any other, but no one had ever seen them in action. Now the Thraxians had no choice but to make contact with the Federation. They sent a message pleading for aid, hoping for salvation from the advanced technologies of the Galactic Federation. What they got was disappointment. Their allies responded slowly, with hesitation, offering only cautious words and promises of support after a full investigation. But none of it came soon enough. The invaders were getting closer. Thrax's military had already suffered severe losses. Entire fleets were obliterated in mere hours. No time was left. The capital was nearly in ruins. The last desperate survivors were trapped in bunkers beneath the ground. And so, in a moment of desperation, the Thraxian High Command turned to the unthinkable. They activated the emergency call to the Deathworlders. A message was sent into deep space, a cry for help to the humans who had become something of a myth in the galaxy, who survived against all odds on a planet that no one dared approach. The call for aid was simple, but its meaning was profound. They begged the humans to come rescue them, to show them how to fight back against the impossible enemy. The Thraxians had no idea what they were summoning, but they knew they had no other choice. No one else was coming, and they couldn't wait any longer, so they sent the message and prayed it wasn't too late. The Thraxian command center was tense, the usual calm of their leaders replaced by a palpable fear as they waited for any sign of help to arrive. The planet's defenses were nearly exhausted. The enemy was no longer just attacking the cities. They were systematically hunting down every remaining military force, and Thrax's leadership was on the brink of collapse. The cry for help had been sent out days ago, but there was still no response. The Federation was taking its time as usual, playing politics while their people were dying. But then it happened, a flicker in the sky, a strange disturbance, the hum of something immense arriving on the edge of the atmosphere. It was not Federation ships, nor was it any known force from Thrax's allies. What appeared before them was an anomaly, a fleet unlike anything they had ever seen. The ships were rugged and weathered, their hulls scratched and scarred by years of combat. The designs were rough yet efficient, and their arrival wasn't marked by an elaborate show of force or an air of superiority, but with complete simplicity and cold precision. They arrived without warning and without ceremony. Thraxian sensors tried to lock onto them, but every time they attempted to track the ships, they seemed to vanish and reappear, as if they were deliberately avoiding detection. The Thraxians scrambled to make sense of it, but as the enemy fleet closed in on their last defensive position, the strange new ships launched their attack. The humans didn't waste time. They didn't hesitate or negotiate. The first strike came without warning. A massive explosion ripped through the air as one of the invaders' ships was torn apart. The humans didn't even seem to break their formation as they moved in perfect synchronization. The Thraxians watched in awe as the invader fleet which had once seemed unstoppable, was suddenly on the defensive. The humans used tactics that were completely foreign to anything the Thraxians had seen before. Every move was brutal and immediate. There was no hesitation, no plan for negotiation, no mercy. Their first wave was a mix of surprise and calculated chaos. The Thraxians could see that these humans didn't care about traditional warfare rules. They were driven by something deeper, something that made them relentless. They attacked the enemy's weakest points with savage precision, exploiting every vulnerability. They could find every ship that tried to escape was hunted down and destroyed without a second thought. The Deathworlders moved as one seamless unit, like a pack of predators hunting their prey. The Thraxians had never seen anything like it. They watched as the humans used the planet's atmosphere to their advantage, weaving in and out of cloud cover, using the terrain to confuse the enemy and strike from unexpected angles. It wasn't just a battle anymore, it was a hunt. The Deathworlders were working like a well-oiled machine without a hint of hesitation or fear. They were as efficient as they were deadly, and the enemy was starting to panic. The invaders couldn't adapt fast enough to the sheer unpredictability of the human attacks, and they began to break apart one ship at a time. Thrax's forces had been fighting the same enemy for days without success. But now, with the Deathworlders' arrival, the tides were changing every moment. The humans pressed the invaders further back, taking more ground than Thrax had ever thought possible. In such a short time, it was a new kind of warfare, one that the Thraxians had never even imagined existed. The battle was far from over, but now they had hope that maybe, just maybe, they would survive this nightmare. The Thraxians watched in stunned silence as the battle raged on. The Deathworlders were everywhere. They moved in perfect unison, as if they could sense each other's actions before they happened. Each strike, each shot, a decisive move against the invaders. It wasn't just about firepower. It was about instinct. The humans weren't thinking ahead. They were feeling their way through the battlefield, using their environment, using their every sense to anticipate what the enemy would do next. Thraxian officers who had spent their lives studying war tactics were baffled. They couldn't understand how the humans fought. The Deathworlders' unpredictability was a nightmare to track. One moment they were in the sky, raining down precision blasts from above. The next, they were on the ground, ambushing stragglers, using the ruins of a fallen city as cover. Every invader ship that tried to escape the initial wave was hunted down relentlessly, never allowed to regroup or escape. The Thraxian military had always relied on structure and order. Everything had its place. Every soldier knew their role. But the humans seemed to have no such rules. They acted on pure instinct. And it was working. The invaders' lines were buckling. They couldn't adapt fast enough to the chaos. The Deathworlders were in their element. The Thraxians could see that now. They fought like they had nothing to lose, and that made them terrifying. With every passing minute, the human ships were cutting deeper into the enemy fleet. They didn't waste time calculating risk. They moved swiftly, decisively, as if they knew exactly what had to be done. The Thraxian leaders were left in awe at the way the Deathworlders operated. They fought like wolves, cornering their prey, surrounding them, trapping them, until the only option left was to fight or die. The Thraxians had always believed that precision and technology were the keys to victory. But now they saw that there was something else that could win a war, something far more dangerous than advanced weaponry. The humans were relentless. Every time the invaders thought they had gained ground, the Deathworlders would strike again from a new angle, never the same twice. No mercy, no retreat. The Thraxians had seen battles before, but they had never seen one like this. The invaders were on the edge of panic. Their once unified formation had splintered. They were no longer a cohesive force, but a collection of broken ships trying to escape. Every human move shattered their confidence. Thraxian soldiers on the ground, who had barely survived the opening waves of attack, now began to rally with newfound courage. They had been watching the Deathworlders fight, and they understood now what the humans were doing. They were showing them what true resolve looked like. The Thraxians began to adopt the humans' tactics, turning their own defenses into a series of ambushes and unpredictable strikes. As they followed the Deathworlders' lead, they saw a glimmer of hope. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting back for the first time in days. Thraxian commanders felt like they might actually win. The invaders were breaking. They didn't know how to fight this kind of battle, but the Deathworlders did, and they were teaching the Thraxians how to survive against the impossible. General Theris couldn't look away from the chaos unfolding in front of him. The Thraxian forces had just launched another counterattack following the humans' lead, using hit-and-run tactics that they had never imagined would work. But it was working. The Deathworlders weren't just fighting. They were teaching. They were showing the Thraxians how to fight. With no rules, no hesitation, no fear. Every movement had a purpose. Every strike was decisive, and every piece of terrain was used to its full advantage. It wasn't about technology or superiority anymore. It was about the will to win. The Thraxian soldiers had always fought with honor and discipline, but they had never seen anything like this. The Deathworlders fought like they had nothing to lose, because to them, that was true. They fought with savage precision, knowing that survival came at a cost, and that the price of failure was not an option. Theris began to understand the true nature of the Deathworlders' tactics. It wasn't about having the most advanced weapons or the biggest ships. It was about adaptability. If they were faced with a challenge, they didn't simply adjust to it. They overcame it in the most brutal way possible. Every time the enemy made a move, the Deathworlders countered with an attack that was faster, more aggressive, and more unpredictable than anything the invaders could imagine. Humans didn't just adapt to the battlefield. They'd reshaped it. They used the ruins of destroyed cities as traps. They turned the natural terrain into a weapon. And they never gave their enemies a chance to breathe. They hunted down every single ship, every fleeing invader with relentless efficiency and without a second thought to the consequences. The Thraxian forces were starting to mimic them, using the same strategies. They began to see their enemies not as invincible invaders, but as prey. It was an uncomfortable realization, but it was one they had to accept. The invaders were not gods. They were just another enemy to be destroyed, and the Deathworlders had taught them that lesson in the hardest possible way. Theris watched as a group of human soldiers, 3 in total, flanked a massive invader warship that had been trying to escape the battle. They moved silently through the wreckage of a fallen tower, taking position in a crumbled building. Then, without warning, they opened fire with such precision that the entire enemy ship seemed to disintegrate from within. The Thraxians had never seen an assault like that, so calculated, so deadly. It was a shockwave of destruction that left nothing in its wake. Theris realized with a cold shiver that the Deathworlders were more than just warriors. They were predators. The Thraxians had always thought of themselves as the apex species of their system, but the humans made them question that belief. The Deathworlders didn't need a fleet as large or as advanced as the Thraxians. They needed only their instinct and their ruthlessness. And now Thrax had learned that to survive in the galaxy, they needed to think like the humans. They needed to become predators themselves. Theris stood tall as he watched the battle unfold. The Thraxian forces were pushing the invaders back, but it wasn't just the Deathworlders who were fighting now. The Thraxians were fighting on their own terms. They were fighting to win, and they were fighting like the humans had taught them, without mercy, without hesitation. The tide had turned. The Thraxians were no longer helpless. They were survivors, and they were ready to finish what the Deathworlders had started. The Thraxians had thought they understood war, but now they were learning a brutal new truth. The Deathworlders had done more than change the battle. They had reshaped the very nature of how the Thraxians fought. They had shattered everything the Thraxians once believed about strategy and survival. The invaders were still a threat, but now the Thraxians didn't view them as an overwhelming force to be feared. They saw them for what they were: invaders who could be destroyed. The enemy had begun to falter under the pressure of relentless attack, but it was still unclear what their true motives were. Thraxian intelligence had intercepted fragments of enemy communications, but they still couldn't understand why these invaders were so intent on destroying them. It became apparent that the invaders were more than just conquerors. They were resource harvesters. Their ships were not designed for domination, but for exploitation. They weren't here to enslave the Thraxians. They were here to strip the planet's core of its vital resources. They needed Thrax's unique energy-rich minerals to fuel their dying world, and they had been doing this for years across multiple systems. The Deathworlders had already shown how to fight back, But now the Thraxians understood what they were truly up against. It wasn't just a war of attrition. It was a fight for survival. The Thraxians weren't just defending their cities and military outposts. They were defending the very life of their planet. General Theris stood in the command center staring at the tactical map as the last known positions of the enemy were displayed in glowing red lines. The invaders had been driven back, but their mission was far from over. They had not given up on harvesting the planet's resources, and they were sending in reinforcements to finish the job. The Thraxians had no choice but to mount one final offensive. Their forces had already been pushed to the limit, but the Deathworlders had shown them a new way to fight. It was time for them to step up and take the fight to the enemy. General Theris turned to his officers, and with a grim look spoke the words that had now become a mantra for the Thraxian military. "We will not let them take our world." The final assault began with the Thraxians deploying everything they had left. Every soldier, every piece of technology, and every scrap of their remaining fleet. They moved with precision and ferocity learned from the Deathworlders, their every move coordinated and unpredictable. The Deathworlders didn't hesitate as they joined the Thraxians for the final strike. Their ships darted in and out of the invader fleet with terrifying speed and accuracy. The humans had already prepared a new tactic. An infiltration team of elite soldiers who would breach the heart of the enemy flagship and destroy their command center from within. Thraxian bombers followed in a synchronized wave to provide cover fire, but it was the Deathworlders on the ground who were the true force of destruction. The humans moved with absolute precision and confidence, their elite teams slipping into enemy ships as shadows and causing chaos from within. The Thraxians had never seen anything like it. They could hear the explosions and see the massive flashes of light from above as their forces fought side by side with the humans. But it was the Deathworlders' ruthlessness that drove the enemy back at an unrelenting pace. Their very presence on the battlefield was enough to shatter the invaders' morale, and their leadership soon fractured as their remaining ships tried to flee. It was too late. Their forces were shattered, and their leaders were dead. The Thraxians watched in awe as the last invader ships vanished into the depths of space, leaving nothing behind but a trail of wreckage and dust. The planet was theirs once more, but the Thraxians knew this was only the beginning. The Deathworlders had shown them how to fight, how to survive, but they had also shown them something deeper. The Thraxians now understood that survival wasn't just about defending your home. It was about taking it back when everything seemed lost. The final moments of the battle were upon them. The Thraxians and Deathworlders pressed the enemy back with ferocity. The invaders' fleet was in disarray, their forces split and fragmented, but even as the enemy collapsed, it became clear that they weren't finished. They still had a hidden advantage buried deep within their flagship, a massive reactor capable of devastating Thrax in a final act of defiance. General Theris knew that even with the invaders retreating, they couldn't afford to let them escape. If the reactor exploded, it would tear the planet apart. The Deathworlders had already moved in. They were closing in on the flagship's heart, the source of the threat. But this was not a simple task. This wasn't just a final strike. This was the most dangerous mission they'd undertaken. The Deathworlders weren't afraid. They were relentless, moving through the wreckage of the invader fleet. They dropped onto the flagship's surface with expert precision, the ground trembling beneath them. As they cut their way inside, their mission was clear: disable the reactor and prevent the enemy from escaping with any resources. They fought as a unit. They had no other choice. The flagship was a maze of hallways and corridors, each more treacherous than the last. The enemy fought back with whatever they had left. But it wasn't enough. The Deathworlders' combat instincts were too sharp. Every soldier knew exactly where to strike and how to incapacitate an opponent without hesitation. Thraxian engineers worked beside the humans, hacking into the invaders' technology with ease, using every trick the Deathworlders had shown them. There was no time to waste. The reactor's core was unstable, and every second brought them closer to annihilation. General Theris could only watch as the final wave of Deathworlders infiltrated the flagship's core. The countdown had begun, but it wasn't just about the reactor anymore. It was about survival. The invaders' desperation grew as they realized what was happening. Their remaining forces began to regroup, trying one final attempt at a counteroffensive. But it was too late. The humans had already taken control of the heart of the ship, and within minutes the reactor was deactivated. The explosion that was meant to rip apart Thrax never came. Instead, the flagship's systems began to shut down, its weapons going silent, its shields flickering out. The Thraxian forces were still in the thick of it on the planet's surface, fighting to clean up the remnants of the invaders. But the real battle was already won. The Deathworlders had done it. They had dismantled the invader fleet from within. While the Thraxians finished the job below, the invaders had no choice but to retreat once more into the darkness of space. But their defeat was final and complete. The Thraxian command center erupted into cheers as the news spread across the planet. The invaders had been driven off, and their most dangerous weapon destroyed. There were still fires to put out and damage to repair, but for the first time in days, Thrax was truly safe. But even as the celebrations began, General Theris felt a strange emptiness. The humans were leaving. They had done what no one else could, but they didn't stay for gratitude. They came for one reason: to fight. And they left once the fight was over. Theris watched as the Deathworlders ships ascended into the sky, breaking the atmosphere in perfect formation. They had done more than save a planet. They had shown the Thraxians how to survive, how to fight and win no matter the odds. The Thraxians would rebuild, but now they knew the price of survival was steep. They couldn't afford to forget the lesson the humans had taught them. Survival means never stopping, even when it seems impossible. As the last remnants of the invader fleet scattered into the depths of space, the atmosphere on Thrax shifted from tension to relief. But that relief was fleeting. The Thraxians had won, but they knew the victory had come at a high cost. The planet was scared, cities lay in ruins, and the threat of the invaders might one day return. But for now, the immediate danger was gone. General Theris stood on the balcony of the command center, staring at the horizon. As the sun began to set over the war-torn landscape, the Thraxians had emerged from the ashes of their shattered civilization, stronger but forever changed. He knew that the Deathworlders had given them more than just a victory. They had given them something that couldn't be easily explained or replicated. They had given them the will to survive. Theris could still hear the sounds of the Deathworlders' brutal tactics in his mind. The silence in their movements, their savage efficiency as they tore through the invaders' forces. It wasn't just their weapons or their technology that had been the deciding factor in the battle. It was their mindset. The Thraxians had fought with honor and discipline for generations, but it was the Deathworlders' raw will to win that had made the difference. They didn't rely on superior firepower. They relied on survival instinct. They relied on the knowledge that no matter what the odds were, they would find a way to win. It was a lesson the Thraxians had learned the hard way, but it was a lesson that would stay with them forever. There was no going back to the old ways. Now Theris turned as a figure approached him through the smoke-filled air. It was one of the human commanders from the strike teams who had helped disable the invader flagship. She was tall, and her eyes carried the weight of 1,000 battles. But there was something else too, something in the way she looked at him, an intensity that made him feel as though she could see through him. "General," she said, her voice calm but direct, "the invaders are gone for now, but we both know this war isn't over." Theris nodded. He had known she was right. It wasn't just about the invaders, it was about what they had taken from the Thraxians, what they had done to their world. "I understand," he replied, his voice heavy with the weight of responsibility. "And we won't stop until we rebuild what's left of the invader forces." The human commander gave him a grim look. "Scattered across the galaxy, but they won't be back anytime soon. It will take them years to recover, but the lessons they learned from this defeat will never fade. They'll remember what happened here, and they'll adapt just like you did." Theris thought about this for a moment, and then looked toward the sky where the human ships had already begun their departure. He had known that the Deathworlders would leave soon. They had come to do what was necessary. And now they were gone. They didn't stay for accolades or celebrations. They didn't need the glory. But that left the Thraxians with a new burden. They had been given a taste of what true survival looked like. They had seen the human way of thinking, a way of life based on never surrendering no matter the cost. And now the Thraxians had no choice but to learn from it to rebuild not just their planet, but their entire way of life with the same fierceness and unpredictability they had witnessed on the battlefield. They would survive because they had no other choice, but they would do it with the understanding that survival was a battle they would have to fight every single day. And they would fight it with everything they had learned from the Deathworlders. Weeks passed since the Deathworlders had left, their ships vanishing into the stars as silently as they had arrived. Thrax had begun the long process of rebuilding. The ruins of cities were cleared, fields were replanted, and the wounds of war began to heal. But even as the planet regained its footing, the Thraxians knew they could never go back to the way things were before. The lessons learned in the heat of battle had changed them forever. General Theris had stayed at the front lines, overseeing the recovery efforts and ensuring the Thraxian military remained prepared. They had been taught how to fight back, but the true test would be in how they adapted to this new way of life. Thrax would never be the same, and for the first time in generations, the Thraxians understood that survival meant constant vigilance, constant improvement. The invasion had been a wake-up call, a brutal reminder that no civilization, no matter how advanced, was safe from the cruelty of the galaxy. But more importantly, it had shown the Thraxians that there was always hope, always a way to survive, even in the darkest hours. And that hope had come from the Deathworlders. The humans who didn't ask for praise, who didn't linger for celebration, but who fought beside them with the raw, unrelenting determination to win. Theris walked through the streets of one of the capital cities, now rebuilt, though still bearing scars from the destruction. There was a somberness to the people now, but also a fire in their eyes. The Thraxians weren't simply rebuilding their cities, they were building a new mindset. They were learning to think like the Deathworlders. Training centers had been established where Thraxian soldiers were being taught the same brutal efficiency and adaptability that the humans had displayed. There was no room for hesitation, no place for doubt. The Thraxians were learning to trust their instincts, to fight with no regard for tradition, but with a singular goal: survival. One of the first things they had learned was how to use the environment to their advantage. Where once they relied on advanced technology and rigid tactics, now they were learning to be unpredictable, to blend into the terrain, and to strike without warning. They learned to become the predators, not the prey. As Theris moved through the streets, he saw the people, the soldiers, the engineers, each one working tirelessly, but also growing stronger, smarter. It was clear now, the Thraxians would not simply endure, they would thrive. The war was over, but the battle for their future had only just begun. In the distance, a fleet of ships entered the atmosphere, and Theris' eyes narrowed. They were not Deathworlder ships, but the unmistakable form of the Galactic Federation's vessels. It was time for the Federation to offer their aid, to help rebuild what had been lost. Theris wondered if they would come with the same spirit of alliance that had driven the humans. He wondered if the Federation would understand the lessons the Deathworlders had taught. But for now, that didn't matter. The Thraxians had learned something far more valuable than the Federation's resources or technology. They had learned the art of survival, and no fleet, no invasion, could take that away from them. As Theris gazed up at the incoming ships, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The Deathworlders were gone, but their presence would never be forgotten. Thrax had been saved, not just by superior firepower, but by the will to survive. And that, more than anything, was what would keep Thrax strong, no matter what the galaxy threw at them next.